For all I know, we may be visited by a different extraterrestrial civilization every second Tuesday. But there's no support for this appealing idea. The extraordinary claims are not supported by extraordinary evidence.
So as the famous Carl Sagan quote goes, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And to be frank, I don't even know if it's an extraordinary claim. When we have so many planets that there are possibly more grains of sand. Now think about it, more grains of sand in the entire Earth than habitable planets in the universe. That is quite a number to contend with. And so outside of the point that it may not be an extraordinary claim, I did want to go over what some people call the evidence or lack thereof, meaning we have things like the Fermi paradox, which kind of asks, where are they? And really, to me, it's not a matter of whether there's evidence or not. It's more a matter of how we are interpreting that evidence. And that's what I want to go over today. So I want to go over this article called Aliens Wouldn't Need Warp Drives to Take Over Entire Galaxy, Simulation Suggests. Now this is written by Gizmodo. It's a relatively neutral article, but it does hinge on some assumptions that I just kind of wanted to break down, which I think is really important when discussing the possibilities of UFOs and extraterrestrial lives. As it says down here, it's also further evidence that extraterrestrials should have settled the Milky Way by now. So where are they? And that is basically the basis of the Fermi paradox. A new computer simulation shows that a technologically advanced civilization, even when using slow ships, can still colonize an entire galaxy in a modest amount of time. The findings present a possible model for interstellar migration and a sharpened sense of where we might find alien intelligence. Space, we're told time and time again, is huge, and that's why we have yet to see signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. For sure, the distances between stars are vast, but it's important to remember that the universe is also very, very old. In fact, I'll go so far as to say that in terms of extremes, the Milky Way galaxy is more ancient than it is huge, if that makes sense. And I wanted to just stop right there because right away this article is hinging on an assumption, because the idea is that if the Milky Way is so old, then surely there should be evidence, because the amount of evidence that could potentially spur out at any given moment would seemingly exist forever. And I guess that's the assumption that I'm kind of talking about, is that even if you did have a civilization that was able to colonize the galaxy, let's say 8 billion years ago, do you think that the evidence would still be there? I would argue that if it was, let's say, a spacecraft that was orbiting, that it would eventually get eroded by space dust, just simply space dust that it's collecting over the object, even so much so that eventually it might even look like a comet, meaning you'd have a little probe covered with dust that in its outer shell looks like a comet. So to say that the evidence should be there because there's this mass amount of time, well, you also have to assume that somehow the evidence could survive that amount of time in such a way that people can examine it. It's for this reason that I tend to dismiss distances as a significant variable when discussing the Fermi paradox. The observation that we have yet to see any evidence for the existence of alien intelligence, even though we probably should have, another assumption. New research published in the American Astronomy Society is bolstering my conviction, okay? The new paper, co-authored by Jason Wright, an astronomer and astrophysicist at Penn State, and Caleb Scharf, an astrobiologist at Columbia University, shows that even the most conservative estimates of civilization expansion can still result in a galactic empire. Let's go over a few other assumptions. If you can create a nanobot that essentially can replicate itself, or some kind of robot that can replicate itself, well, it's going to need materials. Are you certain that in its replication, its exponential growth, that it's going to be able to find the materials and build upon the materials? What happens if there is a one particular bot that was supposed to go to a certain sector of the universe in time with an exponential growth, but that bot ended up collided by comets or ended up malfunctioning very early on. So that would be an entire branch of the galaxy that would not be covered. If we're talking about nanobots, if they're tiny little nanobots, how the hell are you gonna uncover nanobots? Now, what I think is kind of ironic about this paragraph is that the author, George Dvorsky, well, he states here that this new research is bolstering my conviction. And then he goes on to name a paper that was co-authored by Jason Wright. Now, if I remember correctly, Jason Wright is the astrophysicist who initially proposed a concept that Oumuamua might actually be an alien spacecraft. In fact, I actually have a paper here that he wrote. This was published in 2017 in the American Astronomical Society. And he specifically says that if Oumuamua is a solar system object, it must have been scattered by another yet unknown planet. If this were true, then one might search for such a planet in the directions of the incoming trajectory of Oumuamua and similar objects discovered in the future. However, the orbital energy of Oumuamua is too large to be the result of a single scattering event from any hypothetical solar system object. So it's definitely an interstellar object. And it was one that apparently had, what was one of the references that was made? That it was like hitting a nickel from a mile away in terms of how it came into our solar system and swung around. So what I find ironical about all of this is that they're talking about how there is no evidence, and they quote an astrophysicist who co-authored a paper on an object that came from interstellar space that actually could be evidence of some kind of alien civilization, because the object is so unique, so it's one of the fastest objects, one of the most elongated or flattened objects that's ever come by. It seemed to have accelerated from the sun without any kind of potential gaseous outpouring because we couldn't see any cometary tails. So all the abnormalities that we're seeing with this potential comet could be construed as evidence. And this is what I'm talking about, how they're interpreting the evidence. Shows that even the most conservative estimate of civilizational expansion can still result in a galactic empire. A galactic empire that's 1 billion years old, if that's what they mean. A simulation produced by the team shows that the process of work as a lone technological civilization living in a hypothetical Milky Way-like galaxy begins the process of a galactic expansion. So I'm going to skip here for a second and go to the next paragraph. It says here, Rise of Empires. Things start off slow in the simulation, but the civilization's rate of spread really picks up once the power exponential growth kicks in. But that's only part of the story. The expansion rate is heavily influenced by the increased density of the stars near the galactic center and a patient policy, in which the settlers wait for the stars to come to them, a result of the galaxy spinning on its axis. It's funny that they say that one of their methods is that they would just allow the galaxy to spin within a single object, because another strange thing about Oumuamua is that Oumuamua, as it says here, it originated from the very special frame of reference, the so-called local standard of rest, which is defined by averaging the random motions of all the stars in the vicinity of the sun. Only one star in 500 is moving as slowly as Oumuamua in that frame. The LSR is the ideal frame for camouflage, namely for hiding the origins of an object, avoiding its association with any particular star. So it's like so average between the stars, it's almost like camouflage, is what they're saying. The relative motion of the Oumuamua in the sun reflects the motion of the sun relative to the LSR. And this is my favorite quote here. Oumuamua is like a buoy sitting at rest on the surface of the ocean with the solar system running into it like a fast ship. So not only does that article actually reference an astrophysicist who has been publishing papers on Oumuamua and has been talking about how strange this object is, one of the strangest facts of Oumuamua, which is that it's like a buoy in a spinning galaxy, well, that's exactly one of the points that they make about what an interstellar civilization might do, or how it's capable of expanding and conquering the entire galaxy. So the potential evidence that we have for an interstellar object that might be alien technology is matching their exact description of what they believe could be a process to which an extraterrestrial civilization goes about expanding in a galaxy. Just wanted to point that out. Another neat aspect of the video is that it shows a civilization transitioning from Kardashev status, in which it harnesses the power of an entire star system to a full-blown Kardashev-3 civilization, which has tapped into the energy output of the entire galaxy. It's a huge assumption. I mean, if we're going to assume that civilizations can tap into the power of a galaxy, then why are we doing the simulation where we talk about slow-moving objects? Why don't we just assume that warp drives are real? Why don't we just assume that just the same way that physics went from classical Newtonian physics to Einstein's theory of relativity, that there might be another jump in physics that would allow all this UFO stuff to be a lot more plausible than previously thought? Our civilization keeps pushing the envelope of what's possible, and we have no reason to believe this urge will cease anytime soon. Hence, the assumption that advanced civilization will eventually seek to occupy every corner of the galaxy and set up camp around precious energy sources, namely stars. I love how they say set up camp, and then we have no evidence because we don't seem to detect these camps, but we have all kinds of credible individuals, some of them in the military, talking about how we have bases on our moon that just happens to be the exact same size as the sun from our perspective, almost like some kind of like cosmic clock that was placed there. Nobody seems to talk about that coincidence, but the fact that there might be a base on the other side of the moon that has been reported by multiple credible individuals, well, there's your evidence. There's your camp. You're just not accepting the evidence. That's my point. My personal hero, the late Carl Sagan, go figure, thought it was possible that an alien civilization might spawn colonization waves, but he argued that it would take an inordinate amount of time for a civilization to reach Kardashev-3 status, if ever. That's the one where they're harnessing the galactic powers. The new paper, however, imagines the transition as happening far faster than previously assumed, even under some unreasonably conservative assumptions, which is the Newtonian physics that it just needs to go slow. Slow and steady wins the race. The starting point of the new paper was a model of expansion devised by the same team in 2019, in which the scientists showed how even slow-moving ships like the ones humanity makes today can settle the galaxy in much less time than the galaxy has been around, if they can last long enough to make the trip to the nearest star, as Wright explained in an email. The new simulation presents one example of what this process might actually look like, showing the pace and physical shape of the galaxy scale shaped. It also shows how stellar motions are likely to play a significant role, which, as we just stated, Oumuamua seems to match that premise, that it was just a buoy and the galaxy was spinning around it. The stars themselves are moving around, so once you settle a nearby system, the star moves you to another part of the galaxy where more new stars will wander by and give you another nearby star to settle, said Wright. As noted, the new model is constrained by some very conservative rules. Migration ships are launched once every 10,000 years, and no civilization can last longer than 100 million years. Ships can travel no further than 10 light years and at speeds no faster than 6.2 miles per second, which is comparable to human probes like the Voyager and the New Horizons spacecraft. This means we're not talking about rapidly or aggressively expanding species, and there's no warp drive or anything, said Wright. There's just ships that do things we can actually manage to do with something like technology we design today. Perhaps fast ships using solar sails powered by giant lasers, or just very long-lived ships that can make journeys of 100,000 years running on ordinary rocket and gravitational slingshot from giant planets. It's another interesting thing that he mentions solar sail, because it's actually one of the theories of what Oumuamua might be powered by. Because Oumuamua is either a cigar-shaped object, or it's a super, super thin, flattened, pancake-like object. And that pancake-like shape is what would be predicted if you're talking about solar sail technology, where it's essentially using radiation, the heat from the sun, potentially light waves, to essentially push and create thrust for the object. Even under these conditions, the entire inner part of the simulated galaxy became settled in 1 billion years. Granted, we can see them. Look, I'm just going to stop here. Let's talk about this assumption. I was just listening to a podcast with Sam Harris and Neil deGrasse Tyson, and it was actually a really good podcast. I thought, I know we've criticized Neil deGrasse Tyson before, but he seemed to be very, not so hard-headed about the prospect of UFOs and aliens. He just kind of explained his way of thinking, and that it didn't quite match with trying to find these ETs. But one thing that he did mention that I thought was really interesting was talking about how it would be almost impossible just because of the mere distances and what we can see and not see. For example, if there was like a house in the moon, even our best telescopes on Earth would not be able to see the house. We wouldn't have the definition to see the house. I think the radius of the moon is only 1,080 miles, but the distance of the moon from Earth is hundreds of thousands of miles. I mean, 233,855 miles to be exact. And if you were to actually look at a scale diagram of the Earth and the moon, it's like a tiny little dot here, a tiny little dot super far away. I mean, look how the Earth looks from the moon's perspective. It's just a tiny, tiny little ball. So the point that I'm trying to say is that these objects, even though that's the closest object that we have, we wouldn't even be able to find a house if it's in there unless we send a probe all the way there. So the only way that we're going to actually find evidence of extraterrestrial life is if we actually find the object. Let's say Oumuamua was an actual object that was built by an alien intelligence. We'd have to literally find the interstellar object, or we'd have to do other means, like check the light spectrum for gases to see if there's certain gases that are only associated with life. Strangely enough, when we do that, we find that even planets in our own solar system is giving us these type of detections, as was present with Venus in its upper atmosphere. I forget the exact chemical that it discovered, but it was a chemical that was associated with, or was thought to only be created in association with life. So that's how we find evidence of ETs. You know, to say that the galaxy would be colonized is such a vague term. It's like, yeah, an object that can be, so let's say we sent like the Voyager probe, right? The Voyager probe is now colonizing past our solar system. But to then assume that some extraterrestrial alien race is going to find an object that is tiny, I mean, we can't even find nearby meteors that are less than like 120 feet. How's anybody going to find this tiny little object? So even if it is colonizing, it doesn't mean that the extraterrestrial species or the neighboring species to where the object is going is going to be able to find it. That's just a huge, crazy assumption. Okay, so just continuing here. But as Wright reminded me, our galaxy is over 10 billion years old, so it could have happened many times over, even with those parameters. Interestingly, the simulation also shows how rapidly expansion occurs once the settlement front reaches the galactic bulge and center, as the astronomers wrote in the papers. Stars near the core are much closer to each other, so that tracks, but it's striking to see it happen in the video, said Wright. The new video confirms and validates previous work showing that the center of galaxies are promising search directions for SETI, according to the paper. Now, Wright admitted that the simulation relies on very simple assumptions, as we were talking about. Accordingly, the team is now working on a more realistic simulation that will allow for greater variation in these parameters, while also allowing civilizations to get both better and worse at interstellar travel. Now, the new paper enhances our understanding of the Fermi paradox. I don't think it enhances our understanding. Because once again, the Fermi paradox may not even be a paradox. To say the Fermi paradox is right here. It's on the title. It says, so where are they? Well, I don't know. They could be right outside the moon, and we just haven't seen them because it's the size of the Voyager spacecraft that we sent outside of the solar system. Maybe Oumuamua is one of those objects. Maybe they're already here, but you're just not recognizing the pattern. What about the many astronomers who claim that UFOs are real? Edgar Mitchell, Gordon Cooper, Dr. Brian O'Leary, Buzz Aldrin, and if you want to believe that what he says meant that he saw a UFO.
We can visit other people with their habitation. We can keep track. If there's something very important to be developed from the moon, we can help. We can join with. Together, we can explore the moon and develop the moon. We should go boldly where man has not gone before. Fly by the comets, visit asteroids, visit the moon of Mars. There's a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this little potato-shaped object that goes around Mars once in 7 hours. When people find out about that, they're going to say, who put that there? Who put that there?
There is also credible military individuals like David Fravor, who actually claimed to have chased one of these objects. The US Navy is now claiming that they have radar imagery of objects that are not of any technology that we know of. So the evidence seems to be everywhere. I mean, according to Dr. Greer, I think there was like 4,000 cases of objects that might have actually touched down on Earth itself, that actually landed and left trace elements on Earth. 4,000. And they're saying, where's the evidence? You know, when they say that, you know what it reminds me? It reminds me of the Matrix movie, where these people are being consumed by this information, by this matrix that they believe to be the full reality. And the best analogy I can say is like somebody's kind of asking, well, where are those robots that are essentially farming the human beings that you claim that humans are being farmed by these robots? Where are they? Well, you can't see them because you're literally in the matrix. Your mind has been warped by only the information that the mainstream media wants you to see. So the mainstream media in the span of a week might repeat 100 to 1,000 times in the news some kind of assumption that makes you believe that these objects are not here. Astronomers, scientists will keep publishing papers and keep making all these conclusions that we have yet to find UFOs, even though we have individuals like Philip Corso, a guy who is actually in charge of nuclear weapons, saying that these things are real. We have so much evidence, but the people are connected to this matrix, this wave of information from the mainstream media that makes them believe that the evidence is not there. That's what I'm thinking. And that's why I think the Fermi paradox may not even be a paradox at all. Because the Fermi paradox assumes that we don't have evidence. Okay? That's the biggest assumption I can think of right now, because of all the aforementioned things that we talked about so far. And it finishes off here by saying, well, rather, this is very good for a steady optimist who feel there should be lots of places in the galaxy that have technology we might be able to detect from Earth. Once again, you may not even need SETI. Get a good journalist. Get a good researcher, an investigative type of mind who can actually request Freedom of Information Acts. Go to the CIA website. We did it ourselves. I mean, I did it myself. I went there and transcribed 57 pages only to find out that the Robertson's panel was sponsored by the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, the Robertson's panel was tasked with analyzing scientifically the UFOs that were spotted over the White House, which then the Air Force was using the information from that Robertson's panel to make the Condom Report, which means all the supposed scientific investigations that were ever done by the government on UFOs started with intelligence operations. Something that not only was sponsored by the CIA, but as it says here, that the CIA was very worried that the public would find out about this. And like I said, it's like we're living in a matrix, and they keep asking these questions that might be completely futile because they either might have an answer or the very basis of the question might be erroneous based on some false assumptions. Now, a question that I think is more apropos, that is more appropriate to the subject, is not where are they, it's where are the motives for all those individuals, from astronomers to jet fighter pilots to individuals who worked in the military who are responsible for nuclear weapons. What is the motive for all these individuals, some of them who came out in the 2001 Disclosure Project by Dr. Greer, that one of the most watched national press conferences that ever existed? Where is the motive for all those individuals to be essentially lying, creating some mythology based on a 1950s sci-fi concept? Yeah, I guess credible military personnel just love talking about science fiction and just trolling people. It's their way of getting back for the younger generation who likes to troll on the internet. They're like, you know what, let's just troll about extraterrestrials. Yeah, maybe that's a better explanation, right? Anyways, thank you so much for joining me. This is Felipe speaking, signing out.